Dear speakers, honorable members of the Parliament, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, and the Australian Kurdish Association for Human Rights. I would like to start by sincerely apologizing for not being able to attend this seminar due to unexpected events and situation. The purpose of this seminar is to discuss the current situation in Iran, a country that for most scholars in international affairs is discussed through the lenses of its nuclear program and its role in the regional crisis in the Middle East. However, as far as for the Iranian people in general and the Kurdish nation in particular concerned, the reality on the ground is something completely different. As you already know, the Iranian Revolution took place in 1979. The purpose of the revolution was to seek social justice, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, etc. Now, after 40 years, none of the goals mentioned have been accomplished, and everything has become worse and people experiencing tough days. In the aftermath of the revolution, Ayatollah Khomeini and his associates called for a referendum in which the Kurdish people did not participate due to being well aware of its undemocratic consequences. The Islamic regime knew from the very beginning that the Kurds would not accept the political foundation of the new government, and that the Kurds would also not accept the new constitution. The conflict between the Kurds and the newly established Islamic regime was a fact from the very start due to disagreements and several fundamental issues. The negotiations which started to take place did not solve any of the existing issues and concerns important to the Kurdish people. Shortly after the failed negotiations, the Islamic regime imposed a war on the Kurds. Fearless fightings in order to resist the brutality of the regime started in many different cities around the Iranian Kurdistan. Because of the resistance, many lives were lost, many were imprisoned, and many were left with serious injuries, alongside devastating construction of the Iranian Kurdistan. We are, as a people, have suffered and we have been deprived of political, cultural, and ideological rights, not to mention victims of major human rights violations. Despite all these facts, we are still in resistance against the regime in the hope to claim the rights we actually deserve. The Islamic regime of Iran looks at the rights and demands of the Kurdish people as a threat to their national security. Currently, there are a disproportionate number of Kurdish political prisoners sentenced to death row across prisons in Iran. In local as well as national levels, Kurds are deprived of ruling or any sort of governing rights. And Iranian Kurdistan has become a military zone inside Iran. In order to be represented locally or nationally, Kurds must go through a certain filtration, as the regime does not want any factual evidence represented against them. Since these restrictions are very much still in place, we are continuing to fight and protest in order to have this form of discrimination against Kurdish people lifted. I would like to emphasize that in the last 40 years, Iran has not only been pursuing nuclear power, which has been seen as the major and sole concern by the United States of America in its allies, but that Islamic regime has also been the major source of terrorism, both locally within its borders as well as internationally. The regime is today a major source for providing military weapons and ammunition to armed groups in several countries and conflict zones, both regionally as well as worldwide. The Kurdistan Democratic Party strongly believes in advocating our issues through dialogue, negotiation, and peaceful solutions. However, unfortunately, the Iranian regime has not accepted this, and they have shown their opposition by assassinations directly targeting our leaders and in different countries all around the world. A large number of prominent cadres and members of our party have been assassinated both inside and outside of Iranian Kurdistan. Almost exactly 30 years ago, on July 13, 1989, Dr. Abdurrahman Qasimlu, the then Secretary General of the KDP, was alongside with one of his colleagues assassinated during negotiations with Iranian terrorists, diplomats in Vienna, Austria. Unfortunately and deeply concerning, there was no trial, no jury, no judge that sought to uphold any form of justice against the killers in Vienna. Instead, the Iranian terrorists were escorted back home to Tehran. The Austrian authorities later on never investigated this brutal and atrocities act of terrorism carried out on their soul by the Iranian regime. On September 17, 1992, in the German capital of Berlin, Dr. Sharafkandi, the successor of Dr. Qasimlu, was assassinated along with two of his colleagues by the Iranian terrorists in the Mykonos restaurant during a meeting with the Iranian political parties. This time, however, there was a trial, a jury, and a judge in place in Germany that aimed to seek justice. According to the Mykonos trial, top Iranian leaders were responsible for this act of political terrorism. On September 8, 2018, the Iranian regime again aimed to strike at the political leadership of the Kurdistan Democratic Party. Direct missile attacks were carried out against our party headquarters in the city of Koysanjak in Iraqi Kurdistan. This missile attack killed 17 people, among them several members of the Central Committee of the party, and as many as 40 others were injured, among them women and children. The attack was in violation of Iraqis and Iraqi Kurdistan's territorial sovereignty and integrity, and was without doubt a definitive violation of international treaties. However, it did not result in any reactions by the international community, except from the United States envoy to the United Nations Security Council. It is also important to state that the attack directly targeted the headquarters of the Kurdistan Democratic Party, which also hosts a civilian compound in which activities take place with the aim to serve the ethnic and democratic rights of Kurdish people in Iran. Within the context of the terrorism assassinations and missile attack against the headquarters of our party in mind, it is of importance to know that the agenda of the Islamic Revolution and its goal written in the Iranian constitution is to prepare the ground for continuing this revolution at home and abroad. The opinion of the Kurdistan Democratic Party in regards to the future rule of Iran is based on the knowledge that Iran is a multi-ethnic country with a different religious cultures, and therefore we strongly believe that the most realistic solution would be to strive for a federalist solution. Federalism would allow participation from all ethnic minorities, decentralization of political and religious power, as well as allowing cultural and ethnical tolerance. It would first be necessary to redefine Iran as a geopolitical unit based on the notion that it is a multinational state where two essential principles of participation and non-discrimination are identified. The next step would be to approach the process of democratization in Iran, which has not yet been widely respected and accepted in the country. I believe that a kind of democracy must be agreed upon which has been well established in order to ensure its future's credibility. The principle of equality must also be respected among all people in Iran. Ultimately, such pattern of work can capture the rights of the people of Iran, the individuals and collective rights of all groups, ethnics, religious, political, and cultural. The recent maximized pressure campaign led by the United States on Iran is designed to deny the Iranian regime to be the world's foremost state sponsor for terrorism as it costs its means to conduct its destructive foreign policy. The current United States campaign is working for the first time in terms of putting economic pressure on Iran. One of the possible outcome scenarios of the ongoing tensions between the two sides and the increased militarization of the region is probably future negotiations and a possible new agreement regarding the nuclear issue. If this would be the case, the situation for the Iranian people would be the same without any change. The Iranian people have two tough options for solving the Iranian problems. The first alternative is to fully get rid of this regime and to forget any form of discussion about reform or change within the current system. The second alternative would be to enforce a comprehensive number of reforms and to change the Iranian constitution and its governing system. Both these alternatives should be able to guarantee a democratic and freely elected system of governance, which would be accountable to the people of Iran and also respect international charters of human rights and democratic values. Until the achievement of any of these two options, I hope that the international community will put pressure on Iran regarding its violation of human rights, democratic rights, as well as the ongoing and intensive ethnic discrimination against the Kurdish nation in Iran. Thank you so much for having me in your seminar.